The trouble with triggers. All right, let's talk about triggers and or the shoulder buttons that you find on many controllers. And a lot of them, you'll have two sets. You'll have the actual shoulder button, the upper button, which is pure digital, so left and right. And then you have the trigger buttons, which on some devices, like the Nintendo Switch, are digital. They're just on off. So they're no different than the shoulder button. But in the Xbox controller and other controllers, those are analog device. They're analog switches. So it's not just on off, it's a variable value, which makes a whole lot of sense because one of the early uses for those buttons was for accelerator and brake for driving games. You know, an accelerator in a car is not on and off. It's, gradual. It's analog. And so here is the inside of a generic Xbox controller. And on the one side, you see the sticks for the left and right, and they have their two potentiometers there, one for X and one for Y. Okay, so that's pretty standard. And what is different with the analogs for the triggers is that there is a similar potentiometer for left and right. Now there's only one because it doesn't have an X and Y axis. It just has a degree of how far you're turning. So these little potentiometers here, this white one and this black one, are connected to a whole complicated mechanism that winds its way up to externally where you could press them. So there's levers and all sorts of plastic parts that go into that. Well, that's a drag because one, it's really hard to modify these boards. And the second thing is, from a usability, from adaptability standpoint, it's difficult because it's no good for one-handed, and there are some solutions for one-handed. And it's just, and the Xbox adaptive controller itself makes it difficult because you don't get at the triggers through USB, you get at the triggers through the 3.5 millimeter jacks in the back, but they have to be specifically set up to handle this. Now the Logitech stuff, some of their things is basically a potentiometer that you kind of press down and that allows you to do the analog, but you still have the problem. You need two of them, and what was the other problem? I can't think of the other problem. You need two of them, which kind of stinks, and that's that. So let's talk about this. My user came up with a really interesting request, is that instead of having two separate triggers, wouldn't it be possible to have a joystick do that work? So, for example, and this is primarily for driving games, but if you went forward with the stick, have that do like right trigger, which would normally be gas, center would do nothing, and then pulling it towards you would do left trigger and do the brake. So that's pretty logical setup in my mind for driving games. Accelerate, 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 release, hold this back to revert, to stop, and then most of the games when you hold down the brake, it'll go into reverse. And you don't need the left and right at all, really. Well, the problem is that a typical joystick won't do this because it has the X and Y axis, but it does not split the axis between north, south, or east or west. Now, I do that in my MIDI controllers, and the reason I'm able to do that is through software. So my software reads the values, and if it's on like the north side of the stick, it will send one set of information, and on the south side of the stick, it'll send the other information. So, I kind of have a way into it. I've thought this through already. And I also, with my MIDI wheels, this is a pitch bend and modulation wheel. The pitch bend is spring loaded, and it allows you to go forward and back. Well, boy, that seems an awful lot like this trigger issue. And so I've come up with what I'm calling a unified trigger. So I used my shrink ray and I came up with a version of this wheel that's small. This is about 30 millimeters across in diameter. And it uses the same concept. There is a sensor on the one side, which is in effect a potentiometer. And it is mounted on, there's a bearing inside here, which you can kind of see. So it's riding on a bearing, so it's very, very smooth. Now, unlike the bigger one, which requires that spring in there, see that spring? This one is small enough that I'm able to use magnets to handle the centering. So there is a magnet in the one wheel part and another complementary magnet in the base part, and those two attract to each other, so you can see it springs back to center. So now I've got something small and it will provide data that I could use. I'm still going to have to use a microcontroller, so I'm not going to be able to plug this directly into the Xbox AC. It still needs the intermediate step. So what this will be read by a microcontroller, and then the microcontroller will control a digital potentiometer, which then outputs the analog values the Xbox AC likes, and will take that and handle the trigger. So the Xbox AC, it will just get plugged in through the regular 3.5 millimeter jacks. To it will seem like a dumb stick or like one of those Logitech triggers. But inside my unit will have the brains that will do that conversation between these sensors and what the Xbox wants. Now, all of this wraps into why and why not. But as you know, I don't like making devices that are already being made by other folks just as well or better. And I'm only really going to jump into something if I feel that I could do something new with it. Well, as I've shown in previous videos, we have this box, which fits on top of the Xbox Adaptive Controller for button control. Now here's a simple one. This one has ABXY, and then it has two additional buttons up here. These are 30 millimeter and these are 24. Now, about sizing, when you see switch sizes on Amazon or other sites, that's the whole size. That's not the actual size of the button. So in effect, these are 25 millimeters in diameter, true diameter, and these are 20. So 20 so that I could kind of fit them a little better. So this is going to be on one side. Now the other side is going to be similar, and I still have it on the printer, so I can't show you at the moment. But it's going to have 4 black buttons that'll act like a D-pad. And then in the middle bottom, we'll have this cunning little unified trigger, so that the user, and it will be mounted inside, so that the user can use, let's say, their thumb to do acceleration and brake all in one trigger, which is why I call it the unified trigger. So that will hopefully solve the problem of triggers. It's gonna be more complicated. It just has to be because of the way the Xbox AC works. But I think with the use of this concept that I used with my MIDI controllers, along with a microcontroller, along with a digital potentiometer, I see a very clear path to making this a solution. So this is going to be available, I think, really, really soon. The plain button one, absolutely. I'm printing out ones right now. And the only real remaining thing, since I know from a proof of concept and a reality standpoint that this works, the only real thing will be, how I'm going to mount it inside the enclosure. And as you can see, I've updated the enclosure a little bit, and now it has fewer jacks because I realized I really only need 6 because I can't fit all that much more onto this space. So there's going to be ABXY, or up, down, left, right, and then there's the 2 auxiliary. Now on this controller, those 2 little ones will be those, but in one that has the unified trigger, it will have the one trigger would be output to one side, the other trigger would be output to the other side. So gas would be one and brake would be the other. And now there's a little cutout for a microcontroller that will need, it'll need to be powered, but there are fortunately USB split cables you can get, so you don't have to go cable crazy with this, or any more than it already is going to be. So that's what's happened with this. I'm really excited that I was able to shrink this down, and I know that this works. This is a reliable way of doing it. It requires the additional components, but again, it's just one of those things we can't get around, at least not cleanly and elegantly, in my opinion. So thank you for watching. This was a long one, but hopefully an informative one.